our national average figures there, we have it in at €834 per hectare. At the current research level, 11 euros per hectare, forage-based diets, etc., we know from the work that we're doing here that we can achieve gross margins of up to maybe double that, so up to about €1,600 per hectare. So that's the sort of range that exists there in terms of the impact of some of those things.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. The Teagasc Sheep Sector Roadmap for 2030 outlines a strategic plan for Ireland's 34,000 sheep farmers to enhance sustainability, profitability and productivity on the farms. We're joined by Dr Philip Creighton, Sheep Enterprise Leader, and Michael Gottstein, Head of Sheep Knowledge Transfer in Teagasc, to discuss this in more detail. We look at the current profile and performance of the sector, key economic metrics and the targets set out for the industry to 2030. Mike and Philip also outlined the economic, social and environmental challenges facing sheep farming, the role research, knowledge transfer and on-farm innovation will play in helping the sector progress towards the roadmap targets.
It's a useful document for people involved and interested in the sheep industry to have a look at, to see, what are the figures there, what's kind of being achieved, what can be achieved, and where are the areas, I suppose, where they can make improvements or pitch in to try and get the industry to that particular point. So this is something we've done a number of years, for over a long number of years now. And I suppose the purpose of maybe doing the podcast with you, Kieran, is to get a bit more kind of airtime for it and to get people more aware that this document exists and that there's a bit of information in it that might be of interest to them.
Okay, so it really sets out, Michael, where the industry is currently standing, the opportunities and the challenges that's there and how they're going to be addressed.
Yep, definitely. Yep, that's it. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Philip, maybe just on that note, it does give a profile of where the sector's sitting at the moment. Maybe just if you could kind of characterise that in terms of the number of farmer families we have in it and the kind of numbers of stock we're talking about.
The purpose of the roadmap is that we take stock of where we are and hopefully maybe have a plan of where we might like to go to, or to deal with some of the challenges. Look, at the sheep sector is an important sector of the Irish agricultural industry. We've about 34,000 family farms involved in sheep production, and if we stand back from that, there's about a quarter of all family farms have some level of involvement in sheep production. Look at in terms of output value, it's down there as maybe the third or fourth highest value to the economy. But for people that are involved in sheep production, obviously it's the most important sector. The last couple of years, I suppose, there has been some reduction in the old flock, and that has its challenges. There's a number of reasons for that. I suppose profitability levels, generation renewal, obviously trying to attract younger people into the industry is going to be critically important. And we have some challenges there, I suppose, in terms of animal health and particularly in our hills as well, in terms of maintaining hill farm numbers and upland management. So that's feeding into it. But there's a lot of positives to take from it as well, but we're not shying away from the fact that we need to look at some of these things, and that's the purpose of having a roadmap.
I suppose, Philip, quite unique in it. Look, as you indicated there earlier, over a quarter of family farms at the moment have sheep in some form of enterprise, and it'll be the primary or secondary enterprise. Probably a little bit unlike some of the other sectors, it's quite diverse from our hills and our uplands down to lowlands. If we're maybe looking at it from a breed point of view, how does that kind of break down within the sector?
Yeah, so I suppose if we look at the makeup of the national flock, based on 2024 figures, you're talking about maybe about 20% of the breeding flock is categorised as lowland breeds. Then another about 30% is categorised as lowland cross. And then you've got your mountain, your pure mountain breeds coming in at about 33%. But then you've got your mountain crosses as well in that. And I suppose where we're unique, I suppose, is that there is integration between the lowland and the hill. There will be replacements coming from the hill into the lowland, which is very important in terms of keeping hybrid vigour and that in the lowland flocks, and also in terms of an outlet for breeding stock coming from the hill areas as well. So there is integration there, and there's crossover between breeds, between both enterprises.
Look, you touched a little bit there on the exports. Maybe just to put a few numbers around that in terms of total output from, or the value of that output, Philip. Where have we been at for the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I suppose, Kieran, look at it's well documented at this stage. Look, the volume of sheep meat has declined over the last couple of years in terms of export. I suppose thankfully the value has increased. So that's offsetting some of that decrease in physical product. And I suppose in 2024 or 2025 we're looking to have an export value of about 400 million. And I suppose that has fluctuated over the last number of years. But as I say, there's a point there now where total volume has gone down a bit. The value has gone up, so we're kind of maintaining that at a level. But the challenge there is to keep the numbers, I suppose, arrest that decline in the flock, or else that number will continue to decline over years, I suppose, you know.
Yeah, and look, I suppose, Philip, that's predominantly from the meat sector, a small amount of wool contributing to that as well.
Yeah, I suppose, look, there is the predominant output from sheep systems is the meat. There is a small value on wool, and I suppose, look, that's dictated by world markets. And hopefully, if those markets were to increase in terms of demand, then obviously the value of the wool would go up as well. But at the moment, it's a very small part of the output in terms of the sheep industry.
Yeah, no, certainly look, some positive trends there. Hopefully they'll continue. Michael, as Philip has touched on there, like one of the other things that's characterized the sector over the past couple of years has been that decline in sheep numbers. Maybe just put a little bit of figures on that for me. Like, where's it kind of come from, or where is it at the moment?
Yeah, so Kieran, I suppose what we're seeing there is a drop in the sheep flock number. So if we look at kind of maybe a 10 years average, we see a kind of a up and down, but I suppose in the most recent census, we're probably down as low as we were in any of the last 10 years. So it's been dropping from the highs of kind of 2021, dropping off every year. Not a huge drop. I suppose it's showing in there somewhere between, the kind of 3.5% to 4% in the O numbers. What we did, however, see is a big drop in lamb kill in particular in 2025. So those figures aren't actually, I suppose, in this roadmap yet because they weren't available at the time of that we were collecting the data. So we're seeing, I suppose, an industry that's been reducing somewhat over the last 3 years. So since 2021, so in 2022 we saw a reduction, 23 we saw a reduction, 24 we saw a reduction. We're just waiting for the 25 figures. Look, I suppose we feel that we have a little bit of rebuilding going on. We will have seen very strong prices for breeding stock in 2025. So hopefully when the figures come out, it'll show some little bit of rebuilding there going on.
I suppose, Michael, to be fair, to put that in context, there was external challenges, both from an economic point of view during that period, as well as weather challenges and two very difficult springs that certainly contributed probably to that decline.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, 23 and 24 were very difficult springs. 25 was a good spring if we think back, but 23 and 24 were difficult springs for people having ewes. Yeah, definitely.
On a more positive side, though, Michael, them couple of years have also been characterised by an increase in profitability. So it's kind of converse to what we just mentioned earlier, or contrary to what we mentioned earlier.
So we would have seen, so I suppose if we go back to 2021 was a really good year. And then we had the kind of challenges around fertilizer prices and COVID and Ukraine war and all those kind of challenges came about then. So I suppose what we're seeing is that family farm income has risen in each of the last 3 years. So if we take from 22 to 23 to 24 and actually the 2025 provisional figures are up as well, and the outlook for 2026 is for it to increase further. So from a farm income point of view, the news is very positive for the sheep industry.
Look, it is a roadmap, and part of the data contained within it is outlining current targets of where they're at, as well as where they can go to, or the projected potential within it. And so maybe we break that down into a couple of sectors. Like if we look at the overall farm system for a moment, Philip, and maybe some of the kind of key sustainability metrics, maybe just take me through from a point of view maybe of stock rate or gross margin at the moment, where we're at and where the potential lies there to increase that.
So I suppose when we're putting this together, Kieran, we took an average of the previous 3 years for 2022 to 2024 as a kind of a where is the industry at the present time. And as Michael has outlined already, I suppose when we were putting this together, we didn't have the 2025 figures to hand. So that's why we used that 3 year rolling average. But I suppose we often talk about some of the key things that will affect profitability, and look, stocking rate obviously is linked to that in terms of stocking rate. From that flows, I suppose, the number of lambs maybe that are available for sale, etc., in combination with litter size, and we'll come to that. But I suppose the national average is around 7, and I suppose it fluctuates between 7 and 8 ewes per hectare the last good few years. Um, we're not projecting a huge increase there. We're only saying that maybe it'll go from the current 7 back up to about 8. But that does have implications then in terms of potential gross margins and net margins, because your costs in general won't fluctuate that much, but you're diluting your costs by having a higher output to sell. So I suppose that's where we're projecting a higher gross and net margin flowing from that. And then obviously we have put in the research targets, well, not targets, the current research results. Obviously, not every farm is going to be able to reach, the research output level. But the reason we put them in there, I suppose, is to show that certainly for some farms there will be scope to push on even further. And then it'll depend on individual farms as to how far along that road you can go, depending on your land type, your location, etc. But that's the purpose of putting them in there. The roadmap is, the idea is that we assess where we are now, potentially where could we get to in the next 4 years or so, and then potentially again where could the thing go for those that want to push on productivity.
And just to look at them, like Philip, in terms of they're quite realistically cheaper for farms that have the capacity to run it. Like you're looking at your stock rates, say maybe going up to 11 euros per hectare, which is a feasible option. Like the impact that could have on the gross margin.
Yeah, so look, I suppose at the moment, if you take the gross margin figures, our national average figures there, we have it in at 834 euros per hectare. At the current research level, 11 euros per hectare, forage-based diets, etc., we project it, well, we know from the work that we're doing here that we can achieve gross margins of up to maybe double that, so up to about 1,600 euros per hectare. So, that's the sort of the range that exists there in terms of the impact of some of those things.
And so look, to get there as well, we have to be conscious of some of the environmental targets as well that are on us. Maybe just briefly outline, like, where do they sit and where are a couple of key areas that we need to look at?
Yep, absolutely, Kieran. And look, we all have to do our bit in terms of reducing the environmental impact of our farming activities. And I suppose again we've 3 kind of main targets in the table here. We have our greenhouse gas emissions in terms of kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of live weight, and I suppose the national average there at the moment is just over 12. We're projecting that we could get that down to maybe 10, and I suppose the current results coming from the research work is about 9.5. So, look, there's a lot of work going on, and we'll come to that in a while, but there's a lot of work going on in terms of trying to deal with some of that. Okay. And then maybe more farmer-friendly, more implementable stuff at farm level that we can see maybe a little bit more clearly is the likes of the use of protected urea to try and reduce our emissions from fertilizer applied. Currently, about 7% of farms using it. We're trying to get to about 30% by 2030. And I suppose the use of slurry application then, so the low emission slurry spreading, just under 40% currently using it, and we're aiming to try and get that up to 80 or plus 80% by 2030.
Look, that's one aspect. And Michael, in terms of breeding, look, I suppose there's some common challenges here you've been looking at for a long number of years, but what are a couple of key areas there you focused on?
Yeah, so look, I suppose, Kieran, one of the areas where a good bit of progress can be made is on the whole kind of side of breeding. And I suppose that's a combination of, I suppose, better management of the ewes around up to mating, so body condition score, but also maybe a little bit on genetics. And at the moment, I suppose the average, if we take the 2022 to 24 average, so for litter size would have been 1.45 or lambs weaned per ewe joined, which is really the figure we should be talking about, is 1.3. So that's 1.3 lambs available for sale, I suppose, or to be kept as replacements for every 100 ewes put to the ram, and kind of a lamb mortality figure based on the back calculation of that, it come in at around 7%. So look, at our target, I suppose, for the industry is to have 96% of the ewes pregnant, so 4% or less of barren ewes, a litter size of 1.6 and a weaning rate of 1.5 1.41, so lambs weaned per ewe to ram 1.41, so to increase that by about 10 lambs per 100 ewes, or 10 or 11 lambs per 100 ewes to the ram. So that's money in the bank for the farmer. I suppose the big cost is in keeping the ewe. And if there's extra lambs there at the end of the year, then even the research work that Phil has done over the years would show that those extra lambs don't chew up a lot of resources or a lot of time on farms. It's actually very small, the amount of resources and extra resources and time that they use. So that's cash in the bank. So if we compare that maybe to what's achievable and what some of the kind of better performing flocks in the current research figures are, again, look at 96% of the ewes pregnant. That's a general target across the board. Litter size up to 1.95, weaning just short of 1.7 lambs, and a mortality figure there of less than 10%. So those are kind of, what people can aim for, I suppose. And that's where the real money is being made then, because look at, as I said earlier, the cost isn't keeping the ewe. If you've got more lambs to sell at the end of the day, because that ewe is more productive, produces more lambs, then that leaves more money for the farmer.
So there's definitely good scope there to push that section of it on.
Definitely, yeah.
Phil, we touched on the stock rate element. We touched with Michael there on the increased output per ewe. In terms of producing the forage and looking at some of the inputs, whether it be concentrated fertilizer, will you just maybe take me through where we stand at the moment? And again, similar to previous, where's the potential there?
And I think it's important that we connect the two here, Kieran. And I suppose when we talk about stocking rate, we can often get lost in terms of a figure, but the reality is stocking rate should only be matched to the feed that can be grown on the farm. So if we look at the the national average figure there, we're saying that there's about 5.9 tonnes of pasture utilised per hectare on lowland farms at the moment. And if we take a figure of about 85% utilisation, which would be typical based on results from trials here, etc., that means that out on farms we're probably growing in or around 7 tonnes of grass dry matter per hectare. And based again on research work that we've done, we would say that for every ewe that you have, you need to grow 1 tonne of grass dry matter to support her for the year. So at a national stocking rate of 7 ewes per hectare, and if we're growing about 7 tonne, that would tell me that we're matching feeds applied to the current stocking rate. But I suppose the point we're trying to make is that there is potential maybe to work on maybe increasing that level of grass production and grass utilisation. And in doing so, we can actually increase the stocking rate to a point on every farm. As I said, is going to be different. But even if we can only increase the production and the utilisation by 1 tonne or 2 tonnes per farm, then that has the potential to carry more sheep and feed them in an economic way. Because I suppose following on from that, what we have seen is that the level of concentrate feed on farms in terms of concentrate per ewe has increased over recent years, and it's currently sitting at about 97 kilos per ewe. We're trying to get that reduced a bit. We have a target there for the industry of getting that back down to about 70 kilos. And obviously we have shown at research level that we can increase that even further. And I suppose connected to that is that we currently see fertilizer use in terms of kilograms of nitrogen per hectare use averaging about 46 kilos. Now in the past that would have been up closer to 70 kilos. And I suppose it maybe is going against the grain a little bit in that we're actually projecting that figure should come back up a bit and back closer up to that 70 kilos, 75 kilos by 2030. Because in reality, spreading that level of nitrogen will help to grow the amount of grass and the amount of feed that we need to feed the sheep. And I suppose if we don't spread sufficient fertilizer to meet the feed demands, this is probably an area where some of this increased concentrate supplementation is coming in. And the reality is that for every kilogram of dry matter of concentrate we feed, it's costing us three times more per kilogram of dry matter than it is to grow a kilogram of grass or pasture. So from an economic point of view and from a sustainability point of view, in terms of it's still relatively low levels of nitrogen use, it will provide a more sustainable system than relying on concentrates, a lot of which may be imported.
Okay, so there's a bit of a trade-off there between both.
Yeah.
Maybe looking at the big picture again, Michael, from an economic point of view, like if we look at the market outlook, and you've already touched a little bit on the farm incomes, where do you see them over the medium term?
Yeah, so look at it. I mean, this is where the crystal ball gazing really kicks in. But I mean, by and large, the medium-term outlook for the sheep meat industry is very positive. And that's basically, over the years, I suppose we would have seen consumer lamb consumption dropping, and I suppose that trend has continued, and lamb is probably one of the most expensive protein sources available to shoppers. But also what we are seeing is a contracting ewe flock across Europe and even globally, So I suppose, from a European point of view, which is our main market, the outlook is positive, and that's primarily due to reducing your numbers.
Okay, and in terms then of that farm income long term, that is something you still project to increase.
Yeah. So look I suppose historically, sheep farming would have been seen as a relatively low income kind of an industry when we compare it maybe to dairying. But I mean, it remains, so we I suppose we've seen increasing family farm income over the last number of years. That seems to be kind of continued into 2025, and the projections are for it to continue to increase into 2026. That said, I suppose there is still a very heavy reliance on EU scheme payments to ensure profitability in the sector. So I suppose from a profitability point of view, on well-run sheep farms, there is a margin, and there is a net margin. And when we look at the National Farm Survey, there is a net margin across those. When we add the payments in, the family farm income obviously then is more significant. But a lot of that money is being driven by the support payments coming under the various different BIS, CRIS, ECO, ANC, acres, sheep welfare, sheep improvement schemes that the farmers are participating in.
Okay. Philip, you've touched on some aspect of this already, but from a social point of view, sheep farming is pretty much represented right across the country, probably more so than any of the other sectors. In terms of rural development and its importance in it, what are some of the kind of key challenges that lie in that sector and areas to focus on?
Yeah, and it's a very important part of the whole story as well, Kieran, in terms of, we'll talk about the sustainability, and we've mentioned a lot about the economics, we've mentioned about the environment. Social is just as important in terms of sustainability, and I suppose for us, definitely, certainly, particularly in the hill sheep areas, there isn't a whole lot of other options for people. So for us, it's about really keeping a strong focus on those hill and upland areas, and trying to support those systems of production to keep people in those areas and to give them options. Because I suppose if that can't be maintained, we're going to lose more people from those most isolated areas. And obviously that's something we don't want. And that's connected, I suppose, to some of in general, the issues around generational renewal, keeping younger people in the industry and attracting people into the industry. And as part of that, I suppose we need to very much look at all options in terms of making it more attractive, using more technologies, all of those wider aspects that can be brought in to maybe try and encourage that.
Look, you touched on the technologies. Obviously, some of them are new and emerging technologies, and Michael, I'll throw this one to you as well. Some of them are existing technologies that just need to be implemented on farms.
Yeah, I think by and large, when people pick up the roadmap and have a look at it, in terms of the technologies and the opportunities for people to improve their management, improve their profitability, improve the labor efficiency. A lot of those are not new technologies. I suppose they're around with a while. No, there are some newer things, and certainly there's a good bit of automation and a lot of the kind of the auto drafting systems and the EIDs and all that. Well, in relative terms, I suppose they're around a while now, but they're relatively new. If we take something that's happened in the last 10 to 15 years as being relatively new. But I think there are opportunities there for farmers, in particular in years like, we'll say, last year gone by and hopefully the coming year, this year, where profitability in the dry stock sector has been high, and there is a little bit of money there maybe for people to reinvest into the farms, that there's an opportunity there for people to spend money in areas around, by purchasing in these technologies to make their life easier. So to improve animal performance, but also to reduce labor.
Probably another key feature of the sector, and it comes up under the social aspect of too, is enterprise integration. It has probably been a feature of it given the number of farms the sheep are present on, and I know it's part of the ongoing work in both the KT and research programs, but is a very important part of the sector as well, whether it be integrating with dairy beef farms, tillage farms. It's an important role to play.
Definitely. Look, I mean, one of the big challenges, I suppose, that we've seen in the last number of years, and it's been increasing year on year, is, for example, the whole area of parasite resistance and the challenges that we have with parasites in small ruminants, sheep and goats. So, I suppose one of the things by putting in or by mixed grazing or running sheep on farms where a portion of the area is assigned to tillage, and that tillage ground is then rotating back in. That's a really good way, I suppose, of reducing parasite burdens. That's just one example.
I suppose another area, Kieran, as well in the integration thing is a lot of the work that we're undertaking here in terms of the store lamb finishing. Trying to demonstrate, the options there in terms of finishing lambs and forage crops compared to indoor finishing and that, and giving people the information that might, make it easier to make decisions around what the value of that to them. And I suppose the benefit of that to the sheep farmer is that it demonstrates that there is a margin to be made, and the benefit for the buyer is that they have a bit more security in terms of what margins they may have and what the kind of costs involved. That's a real life example, I suppose, of integration going on at the moment.
Yeah, look, at something that should be more widely encouraged. I suppose one of the other big challenges, and this one is right across every sector, is the whole environmental area. Philip, I know there's a lot of work ongoing in Athenry and around the country on this at the moment. Maybe you just take me through some of the key areas there that we need to focus on, and there is work ongoing on indeed.
Yeah, and look at Kieran, there's so much environmentally focused work going on now as well, and sometimes people question maybe why there's so much, and I suppose the importance of it is that we need to be able to document the impact that our industry is having, and in a lot of cases it can actually be quite positive, but until we do the work, until we document it, we don't have the figures to be actually talk about that. But if we want to talk about, there's ongoing work there in terms of water quality. So if there is issues around nitrate leaching or anything, we have sheep data now, and we can if there's issues, we can mitigate that. There's the whole methane piece. Methane is a huge contributor to our overall greenhouse gas emissions because we're a ruminant-based sector, along with dairy and beef. It has a big contribution. So again, is there genetic solutions? Is there forage solutions? And we're working on those. And I suppose all of those been integrated then into management advice or breeding evaluations or whatever, and that help is there. And I suppose there is support there then as well for the wider environmental impacts, improving biodiversity or whatever, through various schemes and supports that is available to farmers as well. And I suppose we're here to try and assess some of those measures and to give the best help that we can back out to the industry.
Another key area, I suppose, that always is improving animal welfare on farms, so reducing the level of morbidity and mortality. Michael, it's another key focus as well of both the research and KT programs.
From, I suppose, anything that improves animal welfare is a positive. It improves animal performance. It reduces inputs. It reduces the length of time that the animals are taking to finish. Anytime that we don't have to give an anthelmintic or an antibiotic to an animal because it hasn't become sick, that's a benefit. I mean, there's less drugs being used, in particular with antibiotics. There's significant concern around antimicrobial use in food-producing animals, so the less antibiotics we have to use to keep food-producing animals healthy and thriving, obviously the better. So it's a real win-win. It's a win from every perspective. It's a win from the farmer's perspective. If we take on board the messages coming from that's driven through our research and advisory colleagues, basically what that does is as I said, it reduces the carbon footprint, it improves animal performance, which is a positive thing. It improves profitability to the farmer, and it reduces the inputs, that we're trying to reduce on farms, namely, feed, fertilizer, antibiotics, antiparasitics, those type of things. So these are real positives. There's a lot of work being done on that over the years, and I suppose that's something that we've focused as well, I suppose, on in the roadmap here. It's trying to get that adopted onto farms.
Michael, maybe just to conclude, how would you go about accessing the sheep roadmap?
Yeah, so look at, I mean, the roadmaps are available on teagasc.ie, so www.teagasc.ie, type in sheep roadmap. It'll bring you to the page where all the roadmaps are for all the different industries, and you can click on the ones you want to see. So the sheep one is there. Click on it, and it's basically it's a 4-page document. Has some tables in it. It's easy to read. It's well laid out. Gives a snapshot at the industry, where it's at the moment, where we're hoping to bring it by 2030, and where people who want to drive on can go, I suppose, in terms of the current kind of research, upper level performances limits that are there as well.
That's perfect, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time today. Look, I'll include the link to that in the show notes, and look, good chatting to you both.
Thanks, Kieran.
Thanks, Kieran.
Okay, we'll leave it there for this week's episode. I have included a link in the show notes to the roadmap itself where you can click through and read more about what Michael and Philip were discussing. That's it for me. I'm Kieran Lynch. Don't forget to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.